Here I am, back again with another video about live incidents. I'm sure you've all seen the first video I did, 13 horrifying incidents that happened live, since it has a decent amount of views, I suppose. The second one I think is actually better than the first one, but of course YouTube decided to age restrict it months after I uploaded it, so thanks for that, YouTube. Anyway, you know how these videos work. They revolve around scary, horrifying, and generally just shocking things that happened either live on TV or at events where an audience was present. Just remember, this is YouTube, so I can't show any graphic violence. This is the site that won't let me say real or after all. Anyway, I've taken up enough time, so here are 9 more horrifying incidents that happened live. In August 1972, athletes, fans and broadcasters from all over the world gathered in Munich, West Germany for the Olympic Summer Games. This was the first Olympic Games to be held in Germany in over 25 years, with the last event having taken place in 1936 under the Nazi regime. Having spent years since the end of World War II working to shed the shadow of the atrocities committed by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party, the event organisers wanted to present a democratic and optimistic Germany to the world, as shown by their game's official motto, the Cheerful Games. The Olympics were held from August 26th to September 11th, with the Soviet Union dominating the event, winning the most gold medals overall. Unlike other Olympic Games, however, this event is not remembered for the efforts of all those who took part, but a harrowing event that took place in the closing days of the Games. In order to distance themselves from the intimidating image of Nazi Germany, the event organisers did not employ any armed guards or any kind of heavy security at all, with the guards that actually were on hand only being trained to deal with drunk and disorderly spectators. Security in the athletes' village was apparently so unfit for the Games that athletes could come and go as they pleased, and could even sneak past security and go to other countries' rooms by going over the fencing that surrounded the village. One person who was particularly concerned about the lack of security was the Israeli delegation head, Shmuel Lalkin, who had expressed concern with the authorities about his team's lodgings. The Israeli team was housed in a relatively isolated part of the Olympic Village on the ground floor of a small building close to a gate, which Lalkin felt made his team particularly vulnerable to an outside assault. The West German authorities apparently assured Lalkin that extra security would be provided to look after the Israeli team. On the evening of September 4th, the Israeli athletes enjoyed a night out before returning to the Olympic Village. The athletes immediately retired for the night upon getting back to their apartments to rest up for the events of the next day. Little did they know, they would enter a real-life nightmare upon waking up. At 4:30 a.m. on September the 5th, a group of Canadian athletes were returning from a night out when they came upon 8 men wearing tracksuits and carrying duffel bags. Believing them to be athletes, the Canadians helped them over the fence into the village. However, these men were not athletes, and in their duffel bags, they carried assault rifles, pistols, and grenades. Using stolen keys, the group made their way into the Israeli apartments. Storming the building, they immediately took wrestling coach Moishe Weinberg hostage, ordering him to take them to the other athletes. He led them to the apartments where the weightlifting and wrestling teams were staying, likely hoping that they would be able to fight the attackers. Weinberg and weightlifter Yosef Romano both attempted to fight them off, but were shot dead in the process. 9 athletes were then taken hostage. The attackers were members of the Palestinian Black September terrorist group, who took the athletes hostage in order to demand that Israel release 250 Palestinian prisoners, and that if Israel refused, the hostages would be executed. Despite the situation, Avery Brundage, president of the Olympics Committee, announced that the Games would continue.
We have only the strength of a great ideal. I'm sure the public will agree that we cannot allow a handful of terrorists to destroy this nucleus of international cooperation and goodwill. We have this nucleus of international cooperation and goodwill we have in the Olympic a movement. The Games must go on.
But reversed this decision 10 hours later and suspended the events. Thousands of spectators rushed from the Olympic Stadium and gathered outside the village to see what was happening. At the same time, Live television crews also gathered on the hill overlooking the apartments and began filming as the terrorists could be seen on the balcony. The event was being broadcasted to 900 million people worldwide. The Israeli Prime Minister refused to cooperate with the terrorists, while the German authorities attempted to negotiate with them after having refused assistance from Israel's counter-terrorist unit. While attempting to negotiate, a police unit attempted to take the terrorists by surprise by scaling the building. However, they failed to realize that news crews were filming them doing this, and that the terrorists were also watching the event on television and would obviously see them coming. This plan was abandoned, and they instead agreed to the terrorists' demand that they and the hostages be flown to Egypt. The police flew them and the hostages to the airport, with the plan to ambush them. Several police officers disguised as flight crew on the plane, without consulting command, abandoned their mission and left the plane. There were also sharpshooters placed around the perimeter, but they had no sniper training and lacked proper equipment. When the terrorists arrived and saw the empty plane, they realized it was a trap and began running back to the helicopter.
في حال تعرضنا لكميل إنه ندافع عن أنفسنا بكل طاقاتنا وكل شجاعتنا ولا مترخص أبداً. وهاي كانت تعليمات القيادة إنه إحنا نقاتل كأننا في معركة، نقاتل عن أنفسنا وعن قضيتنا ولا مترخص أبداً.
The snipers began firing at them, leading to a shootout. One of the terrorists threw a grenade into a helicopter containing 4 of the hostages, killing them and the pilots inside. They then gunned down the remaining 5 hostages. Eventually, 5 of the terrorists were killed, with the last 3 surrendering. In a press conference the next day, the Munich police commissioner made a shocking confession, saying that the terrorists were more clever and professional than them, and that the hostages were doomed to die from the beginning. The games continued after 24 hours, with the remaining Israeli athletes having left Munich. The terrorists were later released after Palestinians hijacked a plane and demanded they be let go. The Arthur Cohn documentary, One Day in September, revealed that the German authorities had helped the terrorist group to hijack the plane in exchange for them to not carry out any more terrorist attacks in Germany. This event obviously shook the world, as it happened during the biggest and most watched spectacle of the year and was broadcast to hundreds of millions of homes. It was most horrifying for the viewers that happened to be Jewish, as once again they could do nothing but watch as Jewish blood was spilt on German soil. Vesta Lee Flanagan II was a television news journalist from Oakland, California. After earning a degree in radio and television at San Francisco State University in 1995, he began his career in broadcasting in 1997, where he worked as a reporter for WTOC-TV in Georgia, before moving to Tallahassee, Florida to work for WTWC-TV in 1999, but was soon let go for, quote, odd behavior, which involved him verbally abusing female co-workers who pointed out mistakes in his reporting, though he claimed he lashed out at them for making offensive comments about his homosexuality. After spending the next decade working at various news stations throughout the southern United States, he was hired by WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia, as a multimedia journalist under the professional name Bryce Williams. Only several months into his time at the station, though, he once again began to display the concerning behavior that led to his dismissal from WTOC-TV, with his co-workers saying that they felt frightened and threatened by him. He had been ordered by the station's director to seek help for his anger issues. WDBJ dismissed Flanagan on February 1st, 2013, citing his volatile behavior. According to a former colleague, upon learning of his dismissal, Flanagan lashed out at newsroom staffers, resulting in the staffers being put in a room while police escorted him out of the building. The station was concerned that Flanagan might return and provided security to the staff there for their protection. Flanagan was apparently so enraged after the incident that he killed his own cats out of anger. He later got a job at a local United Health Group call center after his dismissal. He had a confrontation with a female employee who casually pointed out how quiet he was being, to which he responded aggressively, telling her to never talk to him again. From this point, Flanagan went quiet, and it would be 2 years before he would finally resurface. On August 26, 2015, Alison Parker and her cameraman, Adam Ward, prepared for their assignment to cover the 50th anniversary of the nearby Smith Mountain Lake, with Parker interviewing the executive director of Smith Mountain Lake Regional Chamber of Commerce, Vicki Gardner, about the events. Alison Bailey Parker was a 24-year-old reporter who'd been hired by WDBJ in 2014 as a correspondent for their AM show, Morning. Her 26-year-old cameraman, Adam Ward, had been at the station since July 2011 as a videographer, as well as an occasional sports reporter. The interview took place early in the morning. At around 6:45 a.m., right in the middle of the interview, 8 loud banging noises rang out, followed by screaming. The camera then fell to the ground, with a man briefly being seen before the feed cuts out. WDBJ then switched back to morning anchor Kimberly McBroom at the station's news studio, seemingly confused about what just happened. She later stated that she believed the noises could have been a car backfiring or shots being fired in the background. Alison Parker and Adam Ward had both been shot dead, while Vicky Gardner had been shot in the back but survived. At the news station, Alison Parker's shocked colleagues reviewed the horrific footage, freezing up the view of the shooter. It didn't take long before they recognized him as Vesta Flanagan. They immediately called the sheriff's office. At 11:14 a.m. on the day of the shooting, Flanagan uploaded a 56-second phone camera video to his Twitter and Facebook accounts before they were suspended, shot from a first-person perspective of the incident. ABC News received a 23-page fax at 8:26 a.m., allegedly sent by Flanagan. In the document, Flanagan described his grievances over what he alleged to be racial discrimination and sexual harassment committed by black men and white women in his workplace, believing that he was targeted because he was a homosexual black man. He also claimed that Parker had made a coded racist remark during her internship at WDBJ regarding a friend of Flanagan's, and the board had filed a complaint against him to the station's Human Resources Department after working with him on one occasion. Authorities tracked Flanagan's cell phone to locate him. After abandoning his car at an airport, Flanagan drove a rented car to escape from the police, hoping that they would not be able to identify him from the car's license plate. However, an automated license plate reader in a Virginia State Trooper's car identified the car that had been rented in Flanagan's name, and a chase began. The trooper called for backup and attempted to initiate a traffic stop, but Flanagan sped away. His car ran off the side of the road and struck an embankment after a pursuit of less than 2 miles. The police found Flanagan dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The footage of the shooting is banned from YouTube, not just due to the site's policy on graphic violence, but also because Alison Parker's father, Andy Parker, has made it very clear that he doesn't want the footage of his daughter's murder to be available on the internet, even going as far as to make an NFT out of Flanagan's recorded footage, so that he owns the copyright to it and therefore can issue DMCA takedown notices for any uploads of said footage. It's hard to blame him, really. It makes sense that he wouldn't want people uploading the moment his daughter was taken away from him by such a sick, twisted man. This next segment shows just how far a parent will go to get revenge on someone who harmed their child. Leon Gary Plauché, more well known as simply Gary, was basically what would come to mind if you thought of the well-to-do American working man. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he briefly served in the United States Army before settling down with his wife and starting a family, which he would provide for through his job as a traveling salesman and also as a cameraman for a local news station. He would also work as a coach for his local junior football team. Being a sportsman himself, he obviously wanted his own children to become interested in sports as well. His eldest son Jody Plauché told him that he was interested in learning karate. Gary, of course, supported his son's eagerness and took him to their local karate dojo, where they met the instructor, Jeff Doucette. Doucette was seen by everyone as a very kind, helpful instructor who loved spending time with the children he taught and wanted to make the experience as fun as possible for them. Despite his positive attitude, Doucette did not have an easy life in Baton Rouge. He had no family or friends in the area and earned so little from working at the dojo that he was having to actually live there because he couldn't afford to live anywhere else. Gary Plauché, taking pity on Doucette, began helping him however he could, letting him come round to his family's home for meals, letting him use their facilities, and even taking him on trips with them. Eventually, he became very close to the family. According to Jody's mother, her son quit football and basketball to spend as much time at Doucette's dojo as possible. He instructed 3 of the 4 Plauché children in karate and was trusted in the community. Doucette enjoyed spending time with the boys, and they enjoyed spending time with him. Unfortunately, Jeff Doucette would use the family's trust in him to do something unspeakable. On February 14th, 1984, Doucette picked Jody Plauché up to take him for a drive, telling his mother that they'd be back in 15 minutes. Jody's mother, June, trusted him, and saw no reason to doubt that Doucette would bring Jody back safe and sound. This would end up being a huge mistake. Doucette did not return Jody home that day. Instead, he took him to the bus station, where the two boarded a bus heading to the west coast. On the way, Doucette shaved his beard and dyed Jody's blonde hair to black in order to pass him off as his own son to avoid suspicion. Doucette and Jody checked into a cheap motel in Anaheim, California, just a short walk away from Disneyland. I can't say exactly what Doucette did to Jody in that motel room, but you can probably guess what happened. All I'm going to say is, it's the worst experience a child can go through. This went on until Jody asked to call his parents, which Doucette allowed. Police, alerted by Jody's parents, traced the call and arrested Doucette while Jody was put on a flight back to Louisiana. News crews were there to film Jody being reunited with his parents. Gary was clearly shaken from learning what Doucette had done to his son.
As a parent in your position, did you learn anything from this?
Just how much I love my children. Or maybe a little bit more protective or overprotective, I don't know.
Mike Barnett, a local sheriff's deputy and friend of Gary, who was also the one who told him about what had happened to Jody, said that when he told him, Gary's exact words were, "I'll kill the son of a bitch." After Jody's return, Gary spent several days drinking in the local bar to drown his sorrows, and also asking people when they thought Doucette might be brought back to Baton Rouge for trial. A former colleague from WBRZ News, who happened to be out for a drink, told Gary that Doucette would be flown in at 9:08 p.m. on March 16th. That day, a news crew gathered at the Baton Rouge airport to film Jeff Doucette as he was escorted off the plane by the police. The camera crew waited for him in the arrival hall. The hall seemed to be empty except for one man standing at the payphones. As Jeff Doucette walked past, the man at the payphones turned around, drew a pistol, and fired at Doucette's head. The gunman was Gary Plauché. Mike Barnett, who was among the police escorting Doucette, grabbed Gary and yelled, "Why, Gary? Why?"
Gary! Why, Gary?
Gary was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, which was reduced to manslaughter, to which he pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to a 7-year suspended sentence and 300 hours of community service. Judge Frank Sire ruled that sending Gary to prison would not help anyone, and that there was virtually no risk of him committing another crime. Gary Plauché actually received praise for what he did, with many seeing him as a hero for killing Jeff Doucette, who, as it was later revealed, had harmed many children before Jody Plauché. Gary's own ex-wife June said that when he told her what he had done, her response was simply, "The least you could have done was let me drive you." Years after the event, Gary Plauché suffered a debilitating stroke, which left him almost incapable of speaking. In 2013, Gary gave one final interview. In it, he was asked if he regretted what he did to Jeff Doucette, and if he would do it again.
Do you regret killing Jeff Doucette?
No.
No. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Some people call him the hero. I don't know about that, but most parents understood the situation. If it would have been them, Fat Gary made the statement, and they could dig him up and they'd shoot him again.
He would suffer another stroke a year after this interview and passed away at the age of 68. On one hand, Gary Plauché slaying such an evil human being is not horrifying in and of itself, and certainly no one, least of all his son Jody, were holding it against him. But there's no denying that seeing a man murder another on live TV is something that the people of Baton Rouge were not expecting, and to those watching at the time, it will have certainly been a shocking event. Yet another story about a fire that occurred in a nightclub during a concert. The Cromañón nightclub was a concert venue that operated out of Buenos Aires, Argentina. It was operated by Omar Shaban and opened on April 12, 2004. Shaban intended for it to be an entertainment hotspot in the area, hoping to attract patrons from miles around, and opened the club with a performance by Los Callejeros, a local band that had been growing in popularity. Following the grand opening concert, the club was set to become a big entertainment venue for music fans in Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, within the same year of the club's opening, a massive tragedy would strike. On December 30th, 2004, Los Caballeros were once again performing a sold-out show at the club. Right from the start, health and safety regulations were ignored. The club had a capacity of 1,500, but sold 3,000 tickets, with 1,000 more entering throughout the night. Of course, the true danger begins as it did in the Station nightclub and Collective nightclub of my previous two videos, with pyrotechnics. Just before 11 p.m, a firework was set off on stage. A hanging plastic net instantly caught fire, and foam in the ceiling was soon ablaze. Wood and styrofoam decorations in the club and other flammable parts of the venue, which reportedly included teddy bear stuffing as a cheap alternative to wool fiber, meant the fire spread rapidly, producing lethal toxic gases. Of the 6 exits out of the club, 4 had been padlocked in order to prevent people from entering without paying. As such, a crush began, slowing people's escape from the club, exposing them to smoke filling the venue. With the air filled with poisonous gases such as cyanide and carbon monoxide, those who suffered exposure to the smoke for more than a few minutes died. At the end of it all, 194 had died, while 1,432 were injured. The majority of the victims were teens and adults in their early 20s, though young children and even babies were found amongst the victims as well, as one of the club's bathrooms had been used as a nursery for parents to leave their children during the concerts. Following the incident, Omar Shaban was immediately arrested. Cromañón's fire safety certificate had expired a month earlier, and of the 15 fire extinguishers on site, only 5 actually worked, and the club should have been closed by the superintendent of the fire department. It was revealed that on the night of the concert, Omar Shaban had hired a police officer to provide security on the door and to ignore any irregularities in capacity, alcohol sales, obstruction of emergency exits, and use of fireworks. For not properly enforcing the law with respect to the fire safety certificate and the police department, the city's public officials were considered guilty. Trials for those involved with the violation of fire safety laws, which led to the deaths of almost 200 people, did not begin until 2008. Omar Shaban had been in prison since 2007 while he awaited trial. In 2009, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for fraudulence, but never actually spent any time in jail due to an appeal. He died in 2014 from Hodgkin's lymphoma. Various public officials and police officers were also eventually prosecuted for bribery. As for Caballeros, they did not play again until 2006 and were often pursued by many who held them responsible. By October 2012, they could no longer escape prosecution, and all 6 members were sentenced to 7 years in prison. The deadly consequences of the fire at the Cromañón were unfortunately in part due to 2 common aspects of Argentinian culture: corruption and not enforcing the law. After the fire, many clubs throughout Argentina were closed for not complying with the law. This is not the only nightclub fire that will appear on this list, with the next one you'll be seeing on here being much, much worse. The Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus was the largest traveling circus in the United States. It was founded in a merger between the Ringling Brothers' World's Greatest Show and Barnum and Bailey's Greatest Show on Earth in 1919, and ran for almost 100 years, finally ceasing activity in 2017. It fell out of favor with the general public due to it being one of the few circuses that still used animals as performers, with many seeing it as cruel and inhumane. Many years ago, however, people came from miles around to see the circus, not caring about how the animals were treated. The circus would travel by train throughout all of the United States and usually perform for several days before moving on to the next city. It boasted a truly massive circus tent, being able to hold upwards of 9,000 spectators. The circus became particularly popular in the 1940s. With the world gripped in the chaos of World War II, the circus provided a way for civilians to escape from it all and just enjoy themselves. Due to most young men serving overseas, the majority of spectators that the circus attracted at that point would be women, children, and the elderly. The circus was also affected by the war, as the trains that they would use to travel from town to town were also being used to transport supplies and resources for the war effort. The circus arrived in Hartford, Connecticut on July 5, 1944. They were actually late setting up, as they were supposed to have arrived and been ready to go by the afternoon of that day, but they were delayed due to transport issues. That said, they still managed to put on a show that evening and were set to have another one the next day. July 6th would be an incredibly hot day, with temperatures outside nearing 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and would be even hotter inside the circus tent, where an estimated 7,000 people had gathered for the show. Little did those in attendance know that disaster would strike only after the first act of the show. After the lion tamer had performed and the lions were taken back to their cages, a small fire began on the southwest corner of the tent. It's not known what caused it, but it began spreading fairly quickly. The circus band leader noticed the flame and instructed the band to play Stars and Stripes Forever, which was used to signal danger and distress to the circus personnel. The ringleader of the circus told the audience not to panic and to leave in an orderly fashion, but his microphone was without power as the fire had shorted out the electronics in the tent. Ushers attempted to put the fire out with jugs of water, but this only helped the fire spread, as the tent was actually covered in gasoline as a waterproofing method. Realizing that their efforts were in vain, the ushers instead began helping people escape the tent. As the 7,000 audience members began filing out of the tent as fast as they could, the fire spread to the roof, endangering those who were still in the tent at the time. Eventually, the roof collapsed. Any audience members who were still unable to escape the tent due to the crowded exits, running around trying to find their loved ones, or had simply remained in their seats, hoping the fire would be put out, had perished. At the end of it all, 168 fatalities were recorded. The causes of death ranged from people burning to death to people jumping off the bleachers, and some even suffocating after people were piled on top of each other while trying to escape. Over 700 injuries were also recorded. To this day, the cause of the fire remains unknown. Some believe it started due to a discarded cigarette, while others believe it may have been arson. In 1950, Robert Dale Segee, who had been arrested on several separate arson charges, claimed he was the one who started the circus fire, although investigators doubted he was telling the truth, as there was no proof he was in Connecticut at the time. He would have been 15 and therefore obviously living with his parents, and he also had a history of mental illness, leading the investigators to determine that he was lying. For his other arson charges, he was sentenced to 44 years in prison, where he would remain until his death in 1997 at the age of 68, by which time he had denied ever starting the fire. If the fire was the result of arson, the arsonist was never found, and the true cause will almost certainly never be determined. On July 7, 1944, charges of involuntary manslaughter were filed against 5 officials and employees of the Ringling Brothers. Within the ensuing days, the circus reached an agreement with Hartford officials to accept full financial responsibility and pay whatever amount the city requested in damages. The circus paid almost $5 million to the 600 victims and families who had filed complaints against them by 1954. All circus profits from the fire until then had been set aside to pay off these claims. The circus may be gone now, but its memory lives on, and for the people of Hartford, Connecticut, they will never forget that hot July day of 1944, when over 169 people lost their lives on what should have been just a fun day out with their families. The Coconut Grove was a nightclub in Boston, Massachusetts. It first opened in 1927, operated by orchestra leaders Mickey Albert and Joaquin Renard, but was soon taken over by their mafia-connected financiers and used as a gang hideout as a speakeasy to sell alcohol during the Prohibition era. In 1933, Prohibition ended, meaning the club no longer had to operate in secret and could now sell alcohol legally. That same year, the club's owner, Charles King Solomon, was killed in a shooting, and ownership of the club passed to his lawyer, Barnett Barney Wolanski. Under Wolanski's ownership, the club became a huge hit in the local area, and he was able to expand the club into a 2-story entertainment venue with several lounges, bars, and a restaurant. The club offered its patrons dining and dancing in a South Seas-like tropical paradise, with a roof that could be rolled back in summer for dancing under the stars. The decor consisted of leatherette, rattan, and bamboo coverings on the walls, heavy draperies, and dark blue satin canopies and coverings on the ceilings. Support columns in the main dining area were made to look like palm trees, with light fixtures made to look like coconuts. Wolanski made no secret of his ties to the mob, nor did he hide his connections to Boston's mayor, Maurice J. Tobin, paying his teenage busboys very low wages and hiring thugs off the streets to be waiters and bouncers. He also had zero tolerance for anyone who tried to exit the club without paying, covering most of the exits and bricking one up so that no customer could leave without paying what they owed. He knew that his connections allowed him to completely ignore any kind of safety regulations, as he essentially had every higher-up in the city in his pocket. Naturally, his decision to ignore any kind of health and safety protocol could only lead to one thing: disaster. On the night of November 28, 1942, the club was absolutely packed with over 1,000 patrons, well over the club's 460-person capacity. In the club's basement lounge, a show was being put on by young singer and pianist Goody Goodell, who was on a revolving stage surrounded by artificial palm trees, which also filled the rest of the lounge. At one of the tables, a young couple had unscrewed the bulb nearest to them to give them privacy on their date. When the waiting staff noticed this, a busboy was ordered to go and fix the lamp. Due to the darkness in the dimly lit lounge, the busboy couldn't see properly while he was trying to fix the bulb, and lit a match to help him see. He fixed the bulb and extinguished the match. Following this, however, patrons noticed flames on the fake palm tree nearest to the lamp. The waiters immediately ran over to the fire and attempted to extinguish it with glasses of water and seltzer bottles. The fire began spreading to other palm trees and also the fabric-covered ceiling. In a desperate attempt to stop the fire from spreading further, the waiters pulled decorations off the walls, but this proved to be a terrible mistake, as doing so caused the space above the fabric covering the ceiling to be exposed, allowing it to spread even faster. The fire soon engulfed the lounge. As the patrons attempted to flee, a fireball burst into the stairway and towards the lobby. Those still inside the lounge and at the bottom of the stairs at that point were killed instantly, completely burned exactly where they stood, with some of them still being sat at the bar with their drinks in hand. As the fire spread, toxic fumes filled the club, and patrons began rushing for the exit, realizing they were in danger. The staff blocked the exit, demanding the patrons pay before they left. Eventually, the staff realized the danger, and they too began fleeing the building. The exit doors were inward opening, and with the sheer number of people attempting to escape, crushes began. The main entrance, a revolving door, was instantly clogged. The force of the people trying to escape eventually broke the doors, but the oxygen coming into the building from the now open exit only fed the fire more, and a fireball blasted out through the door, killing everyone in its path. When the fire brigade finally arrived, several hundred people were already dead. The fire crew attempted to rescue the patrons frantically trying to escape, many of whom had suffered severe burns with such strong heat radiating from them that it burned the hands of the firefighters. At the end of it all, 492 people had died, with 130 people being injured. For his blatant disregard for fire safety laws, Barnett Wolanski was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but only served 4 years after being pardoned by his old friend and former mayor of Boston, Maurice J. Tobin, who by that point had been elected mayor of Massachusetts. By the time he was released, Wolanski was already dying from cancer and said that he wished he'd died in the club fire. 2 months after his release, he succumbed to the cancer. The tragedy led to new laws being passed in the United States, and later the rest of the world, prohibiting flammable decorations and also making it so exit doors must only open outwards to prevent any obstructions from within the building. Another law required revolving doors to always be flanked by at least one regular outward opening door. The most significant law passed was that under no circumstances should exits ever be chained or bolted shut to prevent escape, and they must all be clearly marked with signs directing to them. The laws put in place following the fire have continued to this day. It's certainly tragic that it took the loss of almost 500 lives to finally cause fire safety to be taken seriously, and it's even more sad that, as we've seen in all 3 of my videos on live events, the laws are still sometimes ignored, causing even more preventable loss of life. Ayrton Senna da Silva was a Brazilian Formula One driver. Born in 1960 in Sao Paulo as the middle child of a wealthy family, he developed an interest in cars and racing at the age of 4, learned to drive his family's Jeep at 7, and competed in his first go-karting race at 13, almost winning the contest but failing due to a collision with another driver. He later won the South American Kart Championship in 1977 at the age of 17. He would later compete in the World Championships, coming second in 1979 and 1980. In 1981, he moved to England and raced for the Van Diemen team, winning the RAC and Formula Ford 1600 championships. After this, he was offered £10,000 to race for a Formula Ford 2000 team. He would dominate the Formula 3 championships in 1983 and in 1984, he would move on to Formula One. Over the next 10 years, Senna would become one of the world's most famous and decorated Formula One drivers, winning 41 Grand Prix tournaments and 3 World Championships while driving for the McLaren team. However, he would leave McLaren in 1994 to drive for the Williams team. Unfortunately for Senna, his performance seems to have immediately taken a hit as soon as he joined the team, as he failed to finish or even score points in his first 2 races, his worst ever start to a season. This seemed to be due to him driving the Williams FW16, a car he was not used to and had no confidence in driving. He was hoping to change this at the 1994 Grand Prix in San Marino, where he aimed to overtake his young rival and star F1 driver, Michael Schumacher. The Grand Prix would get off to a disastrous start. On April 29th, Rubens Barrichello, a young 21-year-old Brazilian driver, who was considered to be Senna's protege, was involved in a high-speed crash during a practice session. Barrichello was knocked unconscious and nearly swallowed his tongue. Seeing the crash, Senna rushed over to Barrichello's car to make sure his friend was alright. Fortunately, doctors were able to save Barrichello, who woke up to find Senna standing over him. After seeing that Barrichello was alive, Senna got back into his car and finished the session. While Senna seemed unshaken in an interview after the session, he apparently broke down in tears when telling his girlfriend about the crash over the phone. The next day, tragedy would strike. Only 18 minutes into that day's qualifying session, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger crashed into the wall outside of the track due to a front wing failure on his car. Senna went to the medical tent to see Ratzenberger, but was told by the doctor that he had died from his injuries. The doctor, Sid Watkins, tried to convince Senna to withdraw from the race, even asking him to go fishing with him in an attempt to get him to drop out from the race, clearly being concerned for his safety after 2 big crashes. Senna told him that he could not stop racing. This would prove to be a fatal choice. On May 1st, the race got off to a terrible start, as drivers Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto were both involved in a serious collision that resulted in debris from their cars flying into the crowd and injuring bystanders. This occurred only minutes into the race. On the 6th lap, Senna was doing quite well, as though his time was only the 3rd quickest of the race so far. He was still ahead of Michael Schumacher. Disaster would strike on the 7th lap, however. During the lap, Senna's car drove in a straight line off the track at 192 miles per hour. He attempted to slow down, but only managed to get down to 131 miles per hour before crashing into a concrete barrier. Cameras caught a shot of Senna briefly moving his head before he lay completely still in his car's cockpit. He had suffered several severe injuries to his head in the crash. The right front wheel of the car had shot into the cockpit and struck him in the head, which caused him to hit the headrest behind him, fracturing his skull. 2 pieces of debris had also penetrated his helmet, one of which struck him through the helmet's visor just above his right eye, rupturing his temporal artery. As the medical team attended to him, it was clear that he was already dead. Sid Watkins, the doctor who had tried to talk Senna out of racing that day, was one of the medical personnel attending to him, and said that as they lay Senna's body on the ground, he let out a sigh, as if it were his spirit leaving his body. The race was restarted, with Michael Schumacher winning. In Brazil, Senna's death was considered to be a national tragedy, and 3 days of mourning was declared across the whole country, with 3 million people gathering in the streets of Sao Paulo to see Senna's coffin. The San Marino Grand Prix is considered to be the darkest event in motorsports history due to the sheer amount of pain and tragedy that took place during it, with 2 drivers being killed and 3 more seriously injured, as well as the spectators who were injured by the debris from Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto's crash. To this day, it's still not known what caused Senna's crash. Some believe it was a malfunction in the car, others believe the car had a punctured tire, and some believed it was simply a driver's error on Senna's part. It seems almost like the Grand Prix was cursed, as years later, Michael Schumacher was involved in a terrible skiing accident that left him with brain damage. Regardless of the cause of Senna's death, it's considered to be one of the darkest moments in Formula One racing, and one of the greatest tragedies in all of sport. The Rolling Stones should need no introduction. They are one of the most legendary rock bands in history and have been recording and touring continuously for 60 years as of 2022. Though lead singer Mick Jagger and guitarist Keith Richards are the only 2 founding members left in the band, following the death of their drummer Charlie Watts in August 2021. Even today, with Jagger and Richards both approaching 80 years old, the band is still known to put on fantastic concerts, with many people noting how Jagger is still just as energetic in his performances now as he was as a young man. In the 1960s, the Rolling Stones were part of the British invasion of rock bands that took the United States by storm. They were easily one of the most popular acts of the time, being eclipsed only by the most successful rock band of all time, the Beatles. However, the Rolling Stones would see considerably more success in the US after the Beatles attracted huge controversy due to John Lennon claiming the band was bigger than Jesus and speaking out against the Vietnam War. The Beatles also stopped touring in 1966 and returned to the UK, leaving the Rolling Stones as the new leaders of the British invasion. They would continue touring the country for the rest of the decade, culminating in a very long tour in 1969. The tour was the longest the band had ever done, and came with some controversy due to critics and fans complaining that the ticket prices were far too high. In an attempt to make up for this, the band announced that they would be putting on a free concert in San Francisco, which would feature several guest performances by several acts that would go on to become legendary in their own right, such as Santana, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. The idea was to emulate Woodstock, which had been put on that same year, and where all of the guest acts set to perform in San Francisco had already performed. Interestingly, the Rolling Stones had also been asked to perform at Woodstock, but declined. The concert venue would be the Altamont Speedway. This venue was chosen only 2 days before the concert was set to go ahead, giving the organizers very little time to set things up. Because of the extremely limited time, the crew were not even able to set up toilets or medical tents, which would obviously be essential at such a large event. The stage was also far too low, being placed at the bottom of a hill, meaning it would only be slightly taller than the concert goers at the front. There was also no security, but the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane recommended the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club to the concert organizers. The Hells Angels, of course, had a very sketchy reputation, with them being linked to drug dealing, violent crimes, gun trafficking, and prostitution. That said, the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane had both used the Hells Angels for security before without incident. However, they had used the relatively well-behaved San Francisco chapter to do security. Security at Altamont was instead largely provided by members of the Oakland chapter, which had a far more violent reputation. While the Angels warned that they were not really security guards, they agreed to simply keep people away from the stage and the equipment, and perhaps stop fights or give directions. They were paid with $500 worth of beer. On December 6th, the event began. Unfortunately, preparations for the show still hadn't been finished. 300,000 people descended on the Altamont Speedway. The mood was tense right from the beginning, as many concert goers quickly began getting intoxicated on drugs and alcohol. Not helping matters were the Hells Angels, who were essentially a time bomb waiting to go off as they were all drunk. The drunk security mixed with the intoxicated crowd would prove to be a dangerous mix. The gang have a hard and fast rule about anyone touching an Angel's bike without permission, and apparently a bike got knocked over in a crowd crush, and the Angels began beating people with weighted pool cues. When Jefferson Airplane vocalist Marty Balin attempted to calm things down, he was struck by a Hells Angel and knocked unconscious. The Hells Angels would also cause trouble during the next set performed by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, when one of the gang members stabbed Stephen Stills in the leg, causing the band to flee the stage. After learning how chaotic the event had become, the Grateful Dead quickly fled without performing, leaving the Rolling Stones as the only remaining act, and it would take 2 hours for them to take to the stage. The lack of the Grateful Dead caused a large hole in the concert lineup, which made concertgoers even more agitated. Hells Angels members Willie Tumbleweed and Bill Fritch warned the Rolling Stones backstage that their delaying tactics would cause the crowd to, quote, blow beyond sanity, and that people would die. They finally had to force the band out onto the stage. When they arrived, the band was met with a hostile crowd, with one concertgoer even punching Mick Jagger in the face. Only 3 songs into their performance, Jagger told the band to stop and pleaded with the crowd and the Hells Angels to calm down, and refused to continue until the audience sat down. During the concert, 18-year-old Meredith Hunter climbed onto a speaker box near the stage to get a better view of the band's performance. This resulted in him being thrown to the ground and beaten by the Hells Angels before being driven off. Following the attack, Hunter returned to the stage area and pulled out a gun. In response, Hells Angel member Alan Pissarro stabbed Hunter in the back 5 times, a mere 15 feet from the stage, killing him.
What happened here anyway?
Yeah, he pulled out a gun.
He did?
Yes, the Hells Angels took the gun away from him. One of them has it now, he showed it to me. And they proceeded to put him down on the ground and start kicking him. And he has a couple stab wounds in his back and one over his ear. And tried to keep him alive, and when we got here, the doctor checked him out, and that was it.
Pronounced him dead, and it was funny.
While Hunter's death is the most infamous moment to happen at the concert, he was not the only person to lose their life that day. 2 people were killed in a hit and run after the show, and 1 drowned in a ditch while high on LSD. Hundreds more people were injured, many of them seriously. With this event, the peace and love era of the 1960s came to a violent and chaotic end. It's considered to be one of the most disastrous live events in history, and that all of the chaos could have been avoided had the concert simply been postponed to give the organizers more time to prepare. As it stands, the Altamont Free Concert has been a dark stain on the history of the Rolling Stones for over 50 years, where 4 people tragically lost their lives at an event that was supposed to be about promoting peace and love. For as long as we've been aware of space, we've always wanted to go there, to see what lies beyond planet Earth, to travel to other planets, and potentially meet other life forms. Space travel became a huge part of the 1950s and 60s Cold War era, where the United States and the Soviet Union attempted to one-up each other with various missions into space. The Soviet Union finally made history in 1961, when Yuri Gagarin became the first human to ever travel to space, completing 1 orbit of Earth before returning. A month later, the United States also managed to send a man to space, with Alan Shepard having the honor of being the nation's first astronaut. By far the most famous space mission, or infamous depending on your view of the event, was the Apollo 11 mission to the moon.
It's 1 small step for man, 1 giant leap for mankind.
Many debate on whether or not the moon landing was actually real, but it remains one of the most iconic and important moments in history. With this, the United States had effectively won the space race. NASA would continue sending shuttles into space over the coming decades without any major incidents. This would of course all change on January 28, 1986. The Challenger space shuttle was the second to be developed by NASA. Prior to 1986, it had completed 9 missions safely and successfully. The shuttle's 10th mission was entitled Mission STS-51L. Its objectives were to deploy a satellite into space to observe Halley's Comet, and perhaps most interestingly, transport a high school teacher into space to perform 2 lectures from orbit. 38-year-old Krista McAuliffe was the teacher in question, selected from over 11,000 applicants to take part in the mission, with then Vice President and future President George Bush Sr. announcing that she had been chosen.
And the winner, the teacher who will be going into space, Krista McAuliffe. Krista teaches in Concord High School in Concord, New Hampshire. She teaches high school social studies. She's been teaching for 12 years. She plans to keep a journal of her experiences in space. She said that, and here's the quote, "Just as the pioneer travelers of the Conestoga wagon days kept personal journeys, I, as a space traveler, would do the same."
It's not often that a teacher is at a loss for words. I know my students wouldn't think so. I've made 9 wonderful friends over the last 2 weeks. And when that shuttle goes, they might be one body. But there's going to be 10 souls that I'm taking with me. Thank you.
That's great.
The launch date for the Challenger was actually pushed back several times due to various reasons, with it originally scheduled to take place on January 23rd. After 5 days, the mission was finally ready to begin. At 11:39 a.m., the launch began. News crews from all over the US were there to witness the Challenger take flight, with millions of people watching at home, as well as a large audience watching from a safe distance on the outskirts of the launch pad. As the shuttle took off into the sky, everyone watched in awe as the Challenger made its way to space. Only just over a minute into the shuttle's flight, however, disaster struck. At 46,000 feet in the air, the shuttle suddenly exploded, breaking into pieces in a massive fireball. The capsule carrying the 7 crew members was not destroyed in the explosion, instead crashing at high speed into the ocean below, where the entire crew would be killed on impact. The crew's families were there to witness the deaths of their loved ones as the Challenger exploded, and millions of school children witnessed the horrifying event via special TV links to their schools. The explosion was apparently caused by a malfunctioning rubber O-ring on the shuttle. The station had been hit by extremely cold weather the night before, cold enough for icicles to form around the shuttle itself. The freezing temperatures of that day had caused the O-ring to stiffen, which in turn led to it losing its elasticity. This caused a tiny gap, believed to be only as thick as a credit card, to form. This allowed hot rocket fuel to leak into the gap, which then ignited and caused the explosion that destroyed the Challenger. Engineers at the factory that had manufactured the rocket's boosters had informed NASA that they believed the O-rings were not suitable for the launch and that it should not go ahead in cold weather, but they were ignored. The several crew members who were killed in the disaster were cremated and had their ashes buried together in Arlington National Cemetery. They are commemorated each year at the end of January in NASA's Day of Remembrance, not only to honor their bravery and determination, but also to remind NASA of its past mistakes, encouraging them to work hard to make sure that another horrible disaster like this never takes place again. Unfortunately, this would not be the last tragedy to befall NASA, but that's a story for another video.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McCullough. We mourn their loss as a nation together. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
And that's the end of the video, folks. It was another pretty long one, hence why it took so long. But as always, I hope the wait was at least worth it and you found the video to be interesting and maybe entertaining in a morbid way. I await all of the "don't all things happen live" comments that I get on these videos. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.